or study of materials that Jacques Vallée had brought to me, some metals and other things that had chains of evidence associated with them being at some UAP or UFO landing. And so, interestingly, some of these metals were very unusual. Super high purity silicon, strange magnesium ratios, the isotope ratios are wrong, et cetera. Now, that's not proof of anything, but it's proof that somebody engineered them. So it's that plus the medical. Those are the kinds of reality-based tests that I can do to provide to my colleagues to say, here is data and evidence. Evidence isn't proof of evidence of anything. Evidence, like in a court of law, is just evidence that you provide to the jury of peers. Right? So, but I sort of have gone a step further. And that is, I'm like, okay, well, if these things are, let's say we get some advanced material, how do I prove that this advanced material was made by some superior intellect? Well, probably the atomic positioning of how the material is made is going to be more advanced than even our most advanced computer chip. So how do you determine that? Well, you need some sort of atomic imager that might tell you where the positions of the atoms are and what the bond structures are. That you say, well, that's something I can measure, and I can give those results to somebody else, and they can say, yeah, it's right or it's not. But at least I can say, no human, at least that I know of, could make this. So I started a company that I've raised money for with this new idea that I have for how to make an atomic imager, and we're doing it. And so, we've raised the money, we're building it already, and I know it will work. So when I have it, whether or not it's useful for looking at UAP materials is almost immaterial, because I know how useful it will be for the nanomaterials, the metamaterials, the alloys that the government, et cetera, uses for biology, et cetera. So rather than predicting what a protein structure or a DNA or a chromosome arm looks like, I'll be able to read its structure directly.
I want to bring you back to you said it was 10 people that didn't have Havana syndrome, that they had some sort of an injury that was associated with a UAP event. What was their thing? Did they have an implant, or was there a...
No, some of them had they had what you would call white matter disease in their brain, like they had been exposed to something. So white matter disease, if you have, for instance, multiple sclerosis, and you look in the brain with MRI, you'll see these white areas which are basically dead. Tissue, scar tissue. They had things like that. One person, one of the pictures that I had was that they had claimed to have seen something in their backyard. They shone a flashlight at it, and the moment they did, they got zapped. And then you see the picture of the guy in the back of his neck, this huge welt and a bruising and a scarring that could. There's no reasonable way you could have gotten something like that just by exposing yourself to a flame, as a for instance, or a blowtorch. And so it's these kinds of events that, and the unfortunate issue with these is that they're not repeatable. They're one-off anecdotes.
Right.
You certainly can't put a person in a place where they become bait for these kinds of events to occur. And so you're sort of...
Some people would volunteer for that, though.
Somebody might, yeah.
To go get zapped. You know about the Travis Walton story, right?
Very much, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of that?
He's kept to his story over all of the years.
That's what's so confusing.
Yeah, I mean, he's had no reason. I don't know that he's profited off of it. I find it fascinating, but it's the irreproducibility of the events that the skeptics, I call them more pseudo-skeptics, they're pseudists, like nudists, they're pseudists that use these one-offnesses of these events to disparage the entire, idea of it. It sounds ridiculous. Well, of course it sounds ridiculous, because you're talking about something that is outside
of... A fucking spaceship that zaps people. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And I don't think that even he would propose, Travis, that he was purposefully hurt.
Right.
I mean, if you walk across an airfield, and get in the plume of a jet engine, you're going to get hurt.
Right.
Yeah,
and his story is that he was taken aboard to heal him.
Yeah.
That there was something happened to him during that event. But the crazy part is that all the other people that are in the truck, they witnessed it, and then they passed polygraph examinations.
Right.
They also told the same story independently when they took them and separated them. And then Travis Walton shows up 5 days later with the same clothes on.
Right.
With this crazy story.
Right. So when people say that, there's no evidence or where's the evidence, my first question to them is, well, what have you read any books about any of this? Have you spent even a moment looking into it? And, I would point them at books like by Robert Powell and Michael Sword's UFOs and Government, which is not a proposal that any of this is real. It's just the story of these events over decades. And so there's books like that, dozens of them, that tell the story of data and evidence. How you contextualize it is, up to your personal biases, let's say. But there's plenty of evidence. But if people haven't looked into it, if they have an opinion about it, and they haven't looked into it, they're more like priests than they are scientists.
Yeah, it's also the public. The general public narrative is UFO equals kook.
Right.
You're a kook. You believe in that? That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. That's ridiculous.
And I don't believe in anything. I believe in the data and the evidence, and the evidence. There's not enough evidence for me to tell a colleague of mine it's real.
Right.
But there's enough evidence for me to say there's a question worth answering.
So when you were talking about magnesium and whatever these alloys are, what is specifically wrong with them that you don't think that it was manufactured by like a standard sort of a alloy plant in the United States or somewhere else?
Right. So the silicon that I'm talking about is from an event in Ubatuba, Brazil, which interestingly, there's another piece of it that appears to have been magnesium, but both of them are of a purity that is unusual for the day in the late 1950s. So the magnesium, and I did an atomic mapping of my piece of silicon down to a level of where it's like 99.999% silicon. And so one piece of it had magnesium ratios that were Earth normal. And these were impurities, let's say. The other piece were way off Earth normal. So, for instance, anywhere on Earth, if you look at the ratios of what the three magnesium isotopes are, 24, 25, 26, it should be like 80%, 11%, 9%, more or less. And anywhere in our solar system, that's more or less what the values should be of the ratios. And that has to do with stellar evolution and how, radioactive compounds might decompose to whatever. But we got this ratio that was just way, way off. So by luck, I came across a postdoc at Stanford. And he and a graduate student, they're both in applied physics, who are interested in UAP. And I said, I've got these ratios. What do you think it means? And so they looked at the ratios and the weird one, and they said, well, let's do some calculations. And so it turns out that the ratios that we have could have been generated from normal magnesium ratios. If you exposed normal magnesium ratios to a neutron source for 900 years at the level of an atomic bomb every few seconds. Okay, so
Wow.
So it's like I'm looking, and this data is literally 2 weeks old, but the calculations are math. So you're like, okay, well, where and how, the chance of getting that number correct on three things is low, to put it mildly. But to say that you had exposed these things to that kind of a neutron source means something interesting, right? So again, it doesn't prove anything other than that the result is mathematically and materially true. So what does it mean? Again, it just for a scientist like me who loves data off the curve, it's catnip. I can't help myself but want to know and understand more about it.
Yeah. I mean, just what you said is what you said about the magnesium ratios. Like, that's... Has there ever been any debunkers that have some sort of an explanation for why you would find that?
No. I mean...
Do they think that your measurements are off?
Well, I mean, the only way... you could create that ratio artificially by purifying each of those isotopes and then pre-mixing them to that ratio. But why you would blow it up over a beach in Ubatuba, Mexico in the late 1950s and then let it sit in a museum in Argentina for 50 years until Jacques Vallée ended up going and grabbing a piece of it and bringing it to me to measure on an instrument in the engineering department at Stanford. Why?
Could you do it physically back then? Would that be possible in the 1950s?
It would have been very hard. It would have been very, very hard. You could, but in the late 1950s, we were still busy trying to isolate and separate uranium isotopes for making more bombs. I mean, let's be serious. What do humans separate isotopes for? To make bombs or to do health-related tagging, which is really only something that came to the fore in the 60s and 70s.
And this predates that by a decade.
It predates it. So it's unusual. It's possible. But, I mean, again, with any of these things, why, for instance, would one of the supposed pieces that came from that event be magnesium at a level of purity that only Dow Chemical at the time had the ability to create?
Now, what else was at this site, and what is the story behind this site?
A fisherman sees this glowing object that kind of released something which then exploded, and he picked up pieces of it. And there's some chains of evidence of how it got to either a newspaper in Brazil or to this South American museum, et cetera. And different studies have been done by different people over time. And the surprise to me was that the piece that I had was silicon, whereas the lore was that it was magnesium. So I've been in contact with the people who talk about it as being magnesium, saying, well, it's, your results don't dispute mine. It just says that maybe there was something different. Is that him there?
Travis Walton?
That's Travis?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Travis.
Okay.
Travis bobblehead.
That's good. Yeah, that's
this.
cool. So, I don't know what it means. I mean, I published probably one of the first peer review papers on a UAP material from an event in Council Bluffs, Iowa. And the event was an object is seen, rotating, lights flashing, etc. Something appears to drop from the object. The police saw it. Several other groups saw it in the 1970s. They all converged on the locale, and this was like in February or something. It was winter, and there was this big pile of molten metal in the middle of this field, probably 30, 40 pounds of it. And people tried to explain it away as, well, a helicopter had a giant vat of molten metal, and then you calculate how far and how big a container you would have to carry molten metal of this type. And so I analyzed it, and with a device that we invented in my lab, actually called multiplex ion beam imaging, which is a kind of what's called secondary ion mass spec, which what you do is you shoot a beam of ions at an object like a sandblaster. It ionizes the material on the target, and then you shoot off and measure the mass of the objects that you just sandblasted off. And so what we found was nothing unusual in terms of isotope ratios, except we found a mixture of metals that, depending on where you looked in the sample, was different. So it would be like iron, titanium, and chromium of a certain ratio here, but a different ratio of those things over there and over here. So what that meant was that whatever this stuff was didn't come completely pre-mixed. It wasn't like a milkshake.
Right.
It was a slurry of partially mixed materials that somebody decided to drop off. So again, this is just data. But my purpose of publishing it was first, and this was published in the Progress in Aerospace Sciences, peer-reviewed. the purpose was to show you're not going to get thrown out of the academy for publishing this stuff. As long as you don't make crazy conclusions and you just say, here's the data, to show people that you can publish this stuff as long as you're scientifically careful in how far you go. You leave yourself plenty of diplomatic exits in the verbiage that you use. And it was part of what then got me to start the Soul Foundation, along with Dave and others, to say, look, it's okay to do this as long as you're careful. And that's why people, Avi Loeb came after me because he had kind of the same pushback from his community, where all he was doing was saying, the question's on the table. I'm not saying it's true. It's just you can't push this off the table. So he had the same kind of righteous indignation that I have that propels me to say, well, I'm going to show you why you can't take this off the table.
So when they found this puddle of molten metal, and it's a bunch of different mixtures, so it seems like there's a bunch of different stuff that was there and it wasn't perfectly mixed. Is there some sort of, have you theorized some sort of a reason why any person or any creature or any being would do that? Is there something that you would extract from that kind of metal, like heating it up to a certain degree and having a mixture of all these things, and this is just a byproduct
I think
they're dropping off?
I think it's a byproduct of some process that might
extract.
It might be part of a propellant system. It might be part of the way that they generate the fields that allow these things to move. Again, these are all mights. It's speculation. But it's like when you see something and do something that you don't understand what it is, you have to be fully open. For all I know, they're flushing the toilet, right?
Oh, boy.
Ooh. But
they got metal poop.
But I have the original Polaroids from the police department of it. So it was real. And people have said, oh, it was thermite. Well, if it were thermite, there'd be aluminum oxide.
Thermite meaning that's how it was melted down?
That's how it was melted down, and it's just some kids playing around, et cetera, and it was a big joke.
Wacky kids with their thermite.
But it turns out there's no aluminum hydroxide, or oxide, I should say, in the sample. I have the analysis. It's just not there.
So it had to have been extreme heat.
It had to have been extreme heat of some kind that would produce it, and whatever it was hovering for a moment, so it wasn't an airplane. And there was no helicopters, and at least no helicopters with flashing lights. And, there's been huge chunks of it still exist.
And the amount of this stuff, the kind of cauldron that would have to exist in order to melt this would be immense.
Was immense, yeah. So people back in the 70s already sort of made estimates of what was required. And people said, oh, it's a meteorite. Well, no, we basically showed mathematically how, first of all, meteorites make holes when they hit the ground. They don't melt when they hit the ground, and they make explosions.
Are there similar instances of something along this line?
Several.
Really?
That's what's so interesting, is that worldwide there are multiple reports of molten metals that get dropped off of these objects. And I have actually two other ones of a molten metal that was dropped off of one case in Australia and another in another area I'm not allowed to say, but it was one actually happened supposedly. I've got to find the guy again in Fresno. Maybe he's listening. That he said stuff dropped, and he has molten metal that landed in a puddle in the asphalt of his driveway, and he saw this object. So and
he's just holding on to it.
He's holding on to it. He reached out to me, and I it was still at a time when I was just kind of getting into this area, but there's many examples of this kind of thing. So, but interestingly, several of these other ones are just aluminum. The one that I have is iron or whatever. So what does that tell me? Does that tell me there's different kinds of ways of accomplishing the goal? But whatever it is, they're either throwing something overboard, or because they don't need it anymore, or because maybe it's getting in the way of something and it's time to get rid of it.
Have you brought in anyone who's like a real expert in material sciences that would theorize, given an immense increase in technology and what potentially do you think this could be?
The purpose of being on shows like this is to have experts maybe give me an idea, because the people I've been to at Stanford, the other professors, they're like, okay, yeah, I got to go.
Yeah, it could actually be detrimental to your career. And that's what's really weird about something when you're just talking about data, specifically in this case, an actual physical thing that anyone can measure.
Right. And I've got plenty of it, and the original piece is like this big that the owner of it had brought to my lab just last summer again.
It's like big as an iMac.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's huge.
Crazy.
And so what is it? I would love for somebody to tell me that it's conventional and has a purely prosaic answer. Then I can go on to the next thing. The whole reason for getting the Atacama mummy off the table was not because I wanted to annoy anybody. It was because it was spectacular. It's obviously something people would pay attention to. So if it's real, let's do it. If it's not, let's get it off the table, because it's usually the stuff that's hidden under the rubble that's the most interesting.
My question about that mummy is not that it's an alien, but if it does register as human in the DNA, is it potentially a different kind of human than us?
Well, certainly we brought in an expert in South American indigenous people genetics, and the analysis showed that the standard genetic mutations that are found in different racial groups around the world matched exactly the Atacama region of Chile. So her parents, her relatives were clearly Chilean. So yeah, I mean that's really all you can say. If someone wants to say that she's an alien, well, that's fine. I'm convinced of what she is and that she deserves a proper burial.
And so it's just a genetic anomaly.
Just a genetic anomaly.
I